Hi. So there was once a time where when you wanted to build something or try new things, you need to have some type of resources to be able to deploy those to, whether it's a physical server or some type of used resources at your job location, or you had to go find something online to be able to house inside of your house to be able to study things like Windows and Linux and now with the explosion of the cloud and a lot of people looking to be cloud engineers, this video, I'm going to go ahead and show how you can easily build a cloud home lab on a budget. And when I say a budget, it's really can be either zero free or maybe less than $5, $10 a month. And I think if you're getting into this field, spending a couple bucks, even if it is $5 or $10 a month, is way cheaper than what some people had to do back in the day of, buying servers and things like that to put in their house. So first thing we're going to need is Terraform. And I say this is because we want to automate this. And if you're going to be a cloud engineer or working within Azure or AWS or Google, you're going to be using a lot of infrastructure as code. And one of the most popular ones is Terraform. And so if you haven't already have a editor of choice, I would recommend Visual Studio Code. You can find that by just going to actually just Google Visual Studio Code, and it should come up like this here. Let me bring this over here. So just go Google and Visual Studio Code, download that. You're also going to need a Microsoft account. So you want to go to azure.microsoft.com and sign up for free. They do got some free like pricing and things like that. And as far as pricing goes, they have what's called also a pricing calculator where you can see some of the stuff that you want to build and how much it would cost. And if you were to keep it running, say for a full month or whatnot. And some of these costs are pretty small. So you might see something like where it says zero point 0.7 cents per hour or zero point 0.02 cents per hour. So if you do the math, monthly, you got a 60 cents charge here for 30 hours of runtime. Obviously, if you kept it running for a whole month, you'd be looking at 14 bucks. But you shut it down, you automate it, and that's what we're going to do to save on some cost. So first thing we're going to do, once you get your editor set up and your Microsoft account set up, you're going to want to create a folder, and we're just going to call this folder Cloud Home Lab on a Budget. And if you haven't already subscribed or liked some of the previous videos, go ahead and do that for me. I'm going to continue to keep putting up good videos and, check out some of the other Terraform videos that I have. If you're not familiar with Terraform or you're looking to learn as you do some of this stuff here today. So inside of your CLI of choice, you're also going to need to make sure you have Azure CLI installed. And I'll put a lot of this in the description down below. So once you get that set up in your account and everything, for Microsoft, we're going to do an AZ login. And you press enter, and then it'll take you to a browser to authenticate. And then that way you can utilize some of the commands that's going to be needed for Terraform to be able to provision the resources that we'll be setting up here now. So with Terraform, you got your .tf files, and essentially everything can be put into one file, but we'll break a couple things up as we go. I might keep it all within one and then share the updated formatting of it in my GitHub repo. So when it comes to actually building a network in Azure, there's a couple things that's needed. And I'm going to bring up some notes here in a sec. So actually, I'll type them up in here. So we're going to need first thing is a resource group. And I'll put this in my markdown file. So if you can, create a readme.markmd, and that's going to let you throw some stuff in a file there. So first thing we're going to need is a resource group. And inside of that resource group, we're going to need a virtual network. And everything in Azure pretty much lives within a resource group. So the resource group is kind of more so what everything in terms of that life cycle holds. Inside that resource group, we're going to need a subnet. So let's just do a 2 or a 2-A or whatever. Now let's just do say subnet, and then um, so we'll keep that there. And on that subnet, we're also going to need a network security group. And then inside this virtual network and within that subnet, we're going to need a virtual machine. And attached to that virtual machine is going to be a public IP. And we're going to need that public IP to be able to remote into our machine that we're going to be building. So this here essentially gets you started in a home lab that would traditionally cost you upwards of hundreds of dollars if you were to have to actually set some of this stuff up yourself, buy machines, keep them running at your house, and licensing for whatever software you're using, whether it's Windows or ESXi and stuff like that. So now let's get started here. So in our main.tf file, the first thing we need is our terraform block. And I got examples of it in other ones. I can kind of show you. So basically you got your terraform block, and within that you have your required providers. And this is essentially saying we require that this provider be set, which down here is our Azure RM provider. And then you have your version, and then you can also set up your backend, so which would be like your state file that gets created to store how your resources are living in Azure. But we won't get into that because we're going to focus kind of on getting us a home lab built. So I can essentially copy this, and I'm going to paste this in here. Now the latest version of Terraform, if I bring this back over here, is if we go into the registry, providers, or I mean the latest version of the Azure RM provider is 3.68. So we're going to pin to that. So 3.68. All right. So like we said, in Azure or in Terraform, the pound sign is your comment block. So we're going to say configure resource group. So for a resource group in Terraform, the convention is kind of the same. So you have your resource block, the type of resource, Azure RM _ resource group, and then the name can be whatever you want to call it. So we're going to call this, we can call it RG1, we can call it main. It's just whatever you call it can't be utilized again within the same Terraform module that you're creating. So we're just going to call this RG Home Lab. And then so to get this information, you would need to go to Azure's or Terraform's website, which we'll bring up here again. Close out of that one. So everything that they have inside the documentation for Azure can be found here. So anytime you need to look for what you need to deploy, you can essentially just, resource group, and here we go. We're under resources. Now the data resource is the way to pull information from an existing resource block or resource that's already provisioned in Azure or from another Terraform deployment. So looking here, looks like we require just the location and the name. So my name is going to be, let's go back here. Name is going to be Home Lab RG. My location is basically going to be where this control is going to be located. It doesn't necessarily mean your resources will be located there, but it's more for the control plane aspect of it, how you deploy stuff to this. I'm just going to say Central US. So if we look back at our markdown file, we now have this done. And if I wanted to test this out, I can essentially save this. and make sure I don't have anything. Take this out. So let's just do a terraform plan. Where are we at? Make sure we're in the right folder. Oh, we need to initialize it. So terraform init. So that's going to initialize the plugin. It's going to download the 3.68 of this Azure RM plugin, and then we need to do a terraform plan. So this plan is basically going to see like, okay, we're creating a resource group, and it's going to be called homelab-rg. So we can actually go ahead and apply this just to get that built. So the next thing we're going to need is a virtual network. So we're going to do another create virtual network, and then resource is going to be Azure RM underscore virtual network, RG virtual network. Put yes down here to get that built. So for our virtual network, we're going to need to see what do we need to all define. So if we look here, so Azure RM virtual network, and as you can see on virtual networks and subnets, there's a standalone subnet resource which allows for subnets to be defined in line with the virtual network resource. It says at this time you cannot use a virtual network with inline subnets in conjunction with a subnet resource. So basically what that's saying is there's a separate Azure RM subnet resource that's separate from the virtual network, which we can do, where you can also just do it like how it would be set up here. So you got a resource and then subnet. Some people like to keep them separate, but we'll keep them together for the sake of this video and some simplicity. So actually, let's take what we had and we'll copy that in there. Well, that's a good idea to just show you that you can basically use some of the examples that they provide. So RG virtual, and then for the name, we'll just call this homelab vnet. In the location, what I like to do is we'll just take the location from the homelab resource group so that it's within the same. So we just basically need to change this part here. So what it's doing is saying use the location that's being provided by the Azure RM resource group .rg homelab .location, which is Central US. Then for our address space, if this is a home lab, you don't have to really worry about this too much, but this would be more so like if you're going to start getting into like VNet peerings and other subnets and things like that. You'll want to maybe take into account what's subnets and VNets you're using. That way you don't have any like overlap in your address spaces. DNS servers, you don't have to worry about that. That's not a required input. As you can see, the only thing that's required is name, resource group, address space, location, and then we'll create our subnet. So we'll actually go ahead and take these out. If you wanted, you could actually make this like Google DNS or something else specifically. That's just going to be what your virtual machines will utilize outside of just using Azure's default ones that they provide. So I'm going to create a subnet called RG Home Lab subnet, and I'm going to take this other one out. So basically, we're going to let's use this one because it actually has a security group which we'll create because we do need one of those. So let's keep this name. And we'll clear this out and we'll put this back to 10.1. So this is a subset of this 10/16. So if we look back into our markdown here, we see that, okay, we got a virtual network and that's done. We have a subnet, that's done. Now we need a network security group. And you can kind of think of a network security group as a kind of firewall that prevents, certain ports and things coming in, but it allows you to open up your network to be accessed specifically from your location or certain subnets within the virtual network or other VNets that are peered, stuff like that. So we're going to need a network security group. So if we look here, basically we have a resource called Azure RM Network Security Group, and the name again, whatever we want to call it, and then our location and resource group that it'll be deployed in. And then we'll have a security rule. And basically we'll create a rule to allow inbound 3389, which is RDP. And I'll set it for any, which is these little asterisks here. So from any port, any destination, any source, and any destination prefix. And I would recommend, if you're actually at your home location, to set it to your outside IP address of your home, which you can find by going to Google and typing in "what is my IP" and press enter. So I'm going to take this security group here and let's add this back into our code down here at the bottom. So we're going to call this home. Actually, let's keep the same. So actually, let's say homelab virtual network. And then let's go homelab RG. And then we'll need to change this back here. All right, and then this is going to be homelab NSG for network security group. And then we'll take this and add that example. So basically now we're going up, and then we're going to take this homelab RG and change these down here. So we're going to call this NSG allow access from home. And for the name, we're going to say for this rule, which is going to be priority 100. So you got, I believe we'll see once we deploy it, but I think the lowest is 100, if I'm not mistaken, and then you can go up from there. So basically, it's a top-down approach as far as like what gets hit first, and if it stops processing rules after that. So we're going to call this allow RDP. And then the protocol TCP, source port any, destination port is going to be 3389. And then the rest of that we can keep. And then tags, we'll keep the tags off. That's just a way to tag your resources for various reasons, but we won't need that in our instance here. So we got our network security group. Now that's done. So now within that network security group, we got a subnet at an NSG at the subnet level. So now we can create our virtual machine. And what we're going to want to look for is a Windows virtual machine. Now with Windows, there are a lot of different instance types, and it's all going to come down to what are you trying to deploy? Don't keep it running for a lot. So if you need something with some good resources, as you can see here, this one has 16 gigs of RAM, 4 cores, and it's 18 cents an hour. This one has 2 cores, 8 gigs of RAM, and it's 9 cents an hour, so half the price. So if you look at it from a cost standpoint, if we take this 9 cents a hour VM and we run it for a whole month straight without turning it off, it's going to cost us $65. Now, remember, you're only charged when the machine is running. Now, if it's not running, you'll still be charged for like some, discs, stuff like that. But it's like $1 or so, and it's not a lot as long as you're keeping your discs small, which you shouldn't really need a lot of discs for practicing and things like that. But let's say over the course of an entire month, we only really kept it running for 5 hours. You would only have to pay 46 cents. And that 5 hours could be like 30 minutes one day, 30 minutes another day, 1 hour another day. And then for the whole month, if it came up to 5 hours of total runtime, you would pay 46 cents. So, I mean, that in itself is a way lesser cost than what you would pay if you were to actually buy equipment or servers to sit in your house. So, what we're going to need to do now is go back to Terraform's website and let's look at virtual machine. So there's a couple of different ones here. So you got Azure on virtual machine, Azure on Windows virtual machine. We're going to actually use this one here. Now, if you actually use the Azure RM virtual machine, I believe, yeah, so it said the resource has been superseded by the Linux and Azure and Windows virtual machine resources. So basically, they, instead of using this generic one, it's superseded now to use these. So now we got every single thing as far as our resource group, VNet, subnet, and our NSG created. We now need a network interface and a Windows virtual machine that it will attach to. So we can essentially make this easy and just copy this here. And we'll make some edits here. So coming down into my main.tf, I'm going to make another comment and say create a virtual network, or not actually virtual network, a network interface. Copy that, and then here it's going to be creating a Windows virtual machine. Now it's good to make notes just to kind of get in the habit of coding and understanding what's being deployed if someone else was to kind of get this and take it amongst themselves to try and use it. All right, so now for our network interface, basically it's going to be the same resource group that we're deploying in. So we want to take the resource name and update these here so that it's going into the same location and resource group. For the size, we want to basically look to see what size do we want to create. So this is a standard underscore F2. If we look at this pricing calculator, a standard, let's say F2. So that's what that's going to build. So a 2 VPCU, 4 gig RAM, and 19 cents an hour. So we can go with that one as well. That's not, bad, depending on what you're deploying. Admin username and password. This basically, you can actually create this in a variable and make it. You can do it a couple different ways. So if you didn't want to store your password within here, you could call it from Key Vault. You could make a password and then change it once it gets created. Or you can create variables and make the values sensitive. And then in state, it will still have the password, but if those were to try to get outputted of some sort, it basically just doesn't show them on the screen. So the reason that it has to have this in the state file that gets created, which is here, and shows it, is because it needs to kind of know when those values change. So that's why it's always important to secure your state file in a way that no one else can get to it. But we're going to keep the values here the same because I'm basically going to blow this away once we're done with it here as well. So I'm going to call this homelab NIC and homelab VM. So for the location, homelab RG. And then for the subnet ID, it's going to be we're going to need to get the homelab. Oh yeah, so we're going to need to go call Azure RM dot subnet. Actually, we're going to need to grab this particular one. So I think I'm going to need to, I think I can go subnet. I'm going to say that doesn't grab it, but let me see here. I might actually separate it to make it easier. Trying to think how I would usually go back in between and grab it from there. But let me continue on. So now we got our standard F2. Network interface is going to be homelab nic.id. Actually, this might be. Yeah, we'll see here in a sec. So now we got all this set. Source image preference is going to be Microsoft Windows Server. Offer Windows Server, SKU 2016 Data Center, and version is going to be the latest. You can find this as well from if you go into Azure and you go to create a resource. It should show you, actually, let's go back here. So let's say Windows Server. Let's say if it was this 2022 data center one on the, yeah, so you see how it says plan ID, product ID. You can get all the information from here. So going to take this. We'll keep it on the 2016 data center. But let me break this part out because actually this might make it a little easier. I'll have to come back and I'll put some notes in on how that's usually called within the, because we could have multiple subnets. So I'd imagine you have to do some type of Azure RM Virtual Network homelab virtual network dot subnet and then get the specific name, but we'll do separate here real quick. And then we'll call this homelab subnet. And then if we go back to Terraform's website, take this subnet block and actually, and then homelab RG. So, okay. So then your prefix 10.00.10/24. This delegation is just if you want to delegate it to a specific type of service or whatnot. I can show you that here. We'll leave that deployed. So now we'll take this out. Actually, I'll comment it out because I do want to come back to actually testing that out as well. And so now inside of our, here we're going to do Azure RM subnet dot, what's it want? The ID. So that's the subnet ID. It's going to get a dynamic IP address, and it's going to be internal. For our VM name, we're just going to call this homelab machine. And now let's save this. Now if we do a terraform plan, hopefully we don't have any errors. We should get a long played out document to actually be able to see what all is being deployed. So 6 things to be deployed. 1 thing is going to be destroyed. And what is that going to be? The home lab. Oh, it's because we changed the name of the resource type or the resource itself. So instead of it being RG home lab or whatever we had, we switched that up. So that does create a destroy. So we're going to just hit terraform apply, and I'm going to hit yes on this. Now I'm going to let this deploy, and then we'll come back and check everything else out here. Just hit yes here. And that should take a little bit of time here. Okay, so those are all deployed now. And so if we go over into Azure, so I do a refresh here. So I got my home lab resource group. I have my network security group, network interface, virtual machine, the disk, and then the VNet that it sits in. Oh, now we will need a public IP. I forgot about that. That's how we're going to be able to access this virtual machine. Because right now, if we go to it, there's not going to be a public IP address to get to it. So we would need some type of something exposed to the outside world. So for a public IP, same thing. What we'll do is just kind of put it in the same area. So it's going to be resource again, Azure RM, public IP. Let's see, home lab, public IP, and then let's go find out what resources are required for that. So if we look for public IP in the documentation, we can probably just take what's inside of here and apply it to our block here. So it's going to say out home lab. Okay, so now that we have a public IP, we need to attach it to our network interface. So if we go back to Azure RM network interface, there should be something for public IP. So if we do public IP address is the block we're going to need, and that's going to go inside the IP configuration block. So inside here, we're going to need another argument that's going to be public IP address ID, and then for that, it's going to be Azure RM. So Azure RM. Oh. All right, so we save that, and then we run another. Let's do an apply, since we already know it's gonna. An apply just does a plan. It just gives you the option to run it afterwards. So should see a change, a creation, and a change. So we got 1 to add, 1 to change. So we're gonna hit yes here, and these are all the things that's getting known. So you see it known after apply, the ID. Some of this stuff is kind of useful for later on down the road when you want to, output some of this information for other particular reasons. So now that this is getting created, we should see that being created inside of our resource group here. So it might take a second to pop in there. But once we get that, we can then plug away into, yep, so there's our public IP. And if we go to our NIC, looks like we kept a name example, but we could have changed that. The public IP address is this 104.43. So if I open up my remote desktop, and actually to see our network security group, doesn't look like it applied to the, oh, it's at the subnet level. That's right. So it's at the subnet level. So if we go to our VNet and we look at our subnet here, it says no network security group none. So let's see what happened here. So if we look at Azure RM subnet, oh yeah, we forgot to put the network security group. So actually, let's figure out what that block is. So we should be able to see there's a, should be somewhere in here for, let's check on the network security group side. Maybe there's a subnet ID field. I don't see. Terraform provides a standalone network security rule and allows network security rules to be defined within. Almost feel like I'm missing something here. Oh, Azure RM Network Security Group Association. Okay, so they have a separate block for that. So we got to take this and let's just put it underneath here. So associate NSG with subnet. And then the subnet is going to be a homelab subnet. And then the network security group ID is going to be that there. So now if we run another apply, we have one to add and hit yes there. And then now on our NSG, we should see that being added in this field here. And it looks like it did. So if we take that public IP that we created, which I think I might have already copied it, or no, I think I overwritten it. Grab this, and we're going to open up our tool of choice and paste that in there and hit add. And the password and information is going to be what we set in our state file or in our configuration here. So admin user and then this password. So now we have a full Windows virtual machine in the cloud that's able to be utilized for any testing, studying for any type of Windows server type stuff, proof of concepts, and things like that. And now the great thing with having the terraform is we can easily stand this up and destroy it at any time. So now that we have that working, if we look inside our portal, all of these resources essentially live within this same resource group. But if you wanted to build all this by hand each and every time, you see how long that could essentially take. So saving this now allows you to make modifications, create additional um, resources and stuff like that. But I can now say at the end of the day or when I'm done with my project, I can do a terraform destroy. And it takes a little second here. And now that it reads the state, compares it to what's in Azure, we should get a destroy on all 5 or 6 of the resources that we have, or 8 of them. So we hit yes there, and now it just takes its little time and starts to delete each resource one by one. And the great thing is it knows the dependencies that are required for what needs to be deleted first and stuff like that. So we can already see the network security group's already been destroyed. The VMs being shut down, probably destroyed. So if we go back into the portal, we should start to see this list shrink. You might have a little lag within the, yep, so it's starting to get a little smaller already. NSG's gone. So yeah, so now and then when every day you're ready to go again, you can just do a Terraform apply and your environment's back up, and that will keep your costs down. I would imagine you shouldn't have to spend any more than a couple minutes a day deploying your resources and saving you tons of money. I'll put this in the GitHub repo if you're interested in deploying it down and making some changes to it. Get to start if you're just getting into cloud engineering or networking in the cloud and building out these resources and continuing to make that file grow and make it better. So again, if you have any questions, reach out. Again, thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next time.